Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a macroeconomic transformation so staggering, it's honestly kind of hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about a nation literally rising like a phoenix from centuries of volatility to become a true global powerhouse today in 2026. It's a story of absolutely massive numbers, a deeply rooted history, and a rapid, almost breathless modernization that is completely reshaping the global landscape as we speak.
Okay, let's briefly map out our journey for today. First, we'll look at the modern behemoth, then a roller coaster history, followed by the engines of growth, infrastructure and trade, and finally, we'll wrap up with the hidden roadblocks.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the modern economic behemoth. $4.15 trillion. Just let that massive figure sink in for a second. That is India's nominal GDP right now in 2026, a number that officially cements it as the world's sixth largest economy. But if we actually analyze this through the lens of purchasing power parity, adjusting for the local cost of goods, that number balloons to an estimated $18.9 trillion. That makes it the third largest globally. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter so much to the rest of the world? Well, it all comes down to consumption. Nearly 70% of this massive GDP is driven entirely by domestic demand. That high domestic consumption is crucial because it essentially insulates India from global economic shocks and recessions. They aren't just some export hub waiting around for other nations to buy their goods. They're a massive, self-sustaining economic engine, consuming at a completely unprecedented rate.
And what's fueling that massive engine? 1.42 billion people. It features a workforce of around 610 million people, making it the second largest on the entire planet. Just to put that scale into perspective for a moment, their workforce alone is nearly double the entire population of the United States. It's a demographic dividend of just epic proportions, with tens of millions of young, eager workers entering the labor pool in just a few short years. But to really grasp how this colossal population is generating trillions of dollars today, we need to take a step back and look at how they actually got here.
Which brings us to Section 2, a roller coaster economic history.
To understand the boom, we really have to trace this dramatic historical arc. It starts way back, around 2800 BCE, with the Indus Valley Civilization, which incredibly had some of the world's first urban sanitation systems and a highly organized agricultural economy. Fast forward a bit to the 17th century, and we hit the Mughal peak. This era was opulent. India was the center of global wealth and effectively the largest manufacturing power in the world, exporting highly sought-after cotton, silk, and spices everywhere. But then we hit the British era, from 1793 to 1947. This was a stark, extractive reality, a long period of severe deindustrialization where local industries were heavily taxed and systematically dismantled. Following independence in 1947, we enter the pre-liberalization period. This was characterized by really intense protectionist policies and heavy state intervention. Finally, we reach a desperate and dramatic tipping point in 1991. Facing a massive balance of payments crisis, literally weeks away from running out of foreign exchange reserves, India was forced to launch crucial economic market reforms. They dismantled monopolies, deregulated industries, and finally opened their doors to foreign investment.
To really highlight how wild that roller coaster ride was, just think about this. In the year 1700, under the Mughal Empire, India accounted for a massive 24.4% of the entire world economy. By 1950, shortly after the British colonial era ended, that share had completely collapsed to a mere 4.2%. It was a severe, devastating drop that left India as one of the poorest countries in the developing world at the time. This context is exactly why today's recovery is so often called a phoenix economy. The growth we're seeing right now is literally them reclaiming a position they held centuries ago.
And to give you a sense of what that pre-1991 era felt like, listen to this quote from legendary industrialist J.R.D. Tata back in 1969. He said, "I cannot decide how much to borrow, what shares to issue. I even need the government's permission for the salary I pay to a senior executive." Imagine being a global CEO today and having to ask the government for permission to give your VP a raise. It sounds completely absurd now, but under that system, which was known as the License Raj, the state controlled almost every conceivable aspect of commerce. Operating a business in India before those 90s reforms was basically an exercise in extreme bureaucratic frustration.
All right, let's move to Section 3 and see what's driving things today. Engines of modern growth.
Now, you might traditionally think of India as a deeply agrarian society, right? But when we break down the modern economy, services completely dominate at 54.7%. Industry sits at 27.6%, and agriculture, despite still employing a massive chunk of the population, contributes 17.7%. What is absolutely fascinating here is the leapfrogging effect. While a rapidly developing country like China became the world's factory, heavily focused on manufacturing physical goods, India basically skipped that heavy, low-cost manufacturing phase. Instead, they morphed straight into a service-heavy, knowledge-based economy, essentially becoming the world's back office almost overnight.
And the sheer scale of output across these diverse sectors is just staggering. First off, India is widely known as the pharmacy of the world. They supply around 1/5 of global generic drug demand and produce over 60% of all vaccines globally. 60%! That makes their pharma sector a literal lifeline for global health. Then you have the IT sector. India is an absolute juggernaut of digital talent, boasting an estimated 4.3 million software engineers as of early 2026. This means India is basically the hidden backend of almost every digital platform and app you use every single day. And of course, we can't count agriculture out. Despite its smaller share of the GDP pie, India remains the largest global producer of milk and jute and possesses the world's largest cattle population.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, Infrastructure and Global Trade.
Because the physical transformation of the country is honestly just as impressive as the digital one. They've laid down over 45,000 kilometers of new, 4-lane and above highways. To put that into perspective, that is enough tarmac to practically wrap around the entire Earth. For railways, a massive 90% of their broad gauge tracks are now fully electrified, which is driving incredible efficiency and significantly lowering carbon footprints for their 1.3 million person railway workforce. And in aviation, they have built 75 new airports in just the last 10 years alone. The whole country is functioning like one giant construction site, rapidly laying down the physical arteries required to sustain and accelerate a multi-trillion-dollar economy.
And they are leveraging all of this to connect outward. In early 2026, India and the European Union announced they'd finally agreed on what's being called the mother of all deals. This happened after 20 years of intense start-and-stop negotiations. So why does a 2-decade negotiation matter to you? Well, because it signals India's absolute willingness to finally play ball on the global stage. Once fully effective, this monumental free trade agreement opens up massive new markets for Western goods, drops tariffs, and fundamentally shifts the gravity of global trade away from older, established paradigms. It's a total game changer.
But it's not all perfectly smooth sailing. That brings us to our final section, Section 5, the hidden roadblocks.
69,000. It's almost hard to believe, but that is the dizzying number of annual compliance obligations Indian businesses face across various federal and state laws. Remember that license Raj we talked about earlier? Well, while the economy officially opened up in 1991, a massive bureaucratic hangover still lingers in the system today. There are over 6,600 recurring statutory filings required each year. This incredibly tangled, extreme regulatory burden remains a major roadblock for modern entrepreneurs and small businesses who are just trying to scale up and compete efficiently on a global level. And that heavy regulatory burden contributes directly to our next, rather sobering figure, 87.2%. That's the percentage of the Indian workforce still engaged in informal employment as of 2025. What does that dichotomy actually look like on the ground? Well, it means you have tech billionaires operating out of gleaming glass skyscrapers, while 87% of the workforce is out there operating in a cash-based shadow economy. No insurance, no safety nets, no tax protections, and no formal contracts. So while the corporate and IT sectors absolutely boom, tens of millions are left navigating completely outside the formal economic safety net. This stark economic divide is arguably the single greatest threat to their long-term stability, and obviously it severely limits the government's ability to collect revenue.
So here is the big question. Can India pull millions out of the informal shadows fast enough to truly claim the global top spot? The infrastructure is there, the digital talent is absolutely undeniable, and that historical resurgence is well underway. But navigating that massive informal sector and cutting through the remaining bureaucratic red tape, that's going to be the ultimate test. Overcoming this final massive hurdle will likely dictate the economic future of the 21st century. Keep your eyes on the data. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.